Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm your host, Mary Fran Johnson, CEO of Mary Fran Johnson Media and a contributing writer on CIO.com, where I cover boardroom strategies and technology leadership. Twice a month, we produce CIO Leadership Live with the kind and generous support of my friends at CIO.com and the CIO Executive Council. We're streaming live to you right now on LinkedIn and on YouTube on our Tech Talk channel. And we welcome all of our viewers who are joining us here today to send in your questions, which I will happily pass along to my guest. We'll be watching for those questions and doing our best to make sure that today's guest takes a crack at them. Today's guest is Ralph Lora, who is the Senior Vice President of IT and the CIO of Lumentum. Ralph joined Lumentum in October of 2018, bringing with him 3 decades of IT leadership experience and digital expertise from multiple industries and major brand name companies. Based in San Jose, Lumentum designs and manufactures optical and photonic products for optical networking and laser applications worldwide. The company is a key player in the telecommunications industry, with annual revenues of $1.7 billion and 5,000 employees around the world. Now, before he joined Lumentum, Ralph served as the CTO at Rodan & Fields, and before that as CIO at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Group and at Clorox. Earlier in his career, he held other technology leadership roles at Cisco, Symbol Technologies, and AT&T Bell Labs. For the last decade, Ralph has served on the board of directors for the Technology Business Management Council, which is an influential nonprofit devoted to promoting business management and standards and IT business collaboration. Earlier this month, he was named as the founding chairman of the board for a newly established nonprofit called SustainableIT.org, which is devoted to advancing global sustainability through technology leaders. Regular readers of Computer World, CIO Magazine, and CIO.com will have seen Ralph quoted over the years in dozens of our stories, and he has graced many of our event stages as well, bringing along his storytelling talents and his wonderful candor as a CIO. Ralph, it's so good to have you here today. Welcome.
It is great to be had. I'm really happy to be here.
All right, good. Okay, let's jump into everybody's favorite topic, the industry disruption and the effects that the pandemic have been having on all our lives. And how has that been impacting Lumentum's business and your customers?
Yeah, it's interesting. A friend of mine coined my favorite phrase at the beginning of kind of all this, and he called it we're currently in the time of the great uncertainty. And boy, has that been true. Yes. We went from the 2 weeks to flatten the curve to over 2 years now, kind of lapping our 2-year anniversary of when we sent everyone home, thinking they'd all be back in the office shortly. So, boy, a lot has happened in 2 years. We've had to all adapt to a much more digital lifestyle. So, and not just at work, but at home and in our personal lives. The rise of delivery services all over the world has allowed people to weather that, but it also put strain on technology networks, among others. We, from a work perspective, also had to deal with technology shortages, supply chain shortages and impacts. Now we're dealing with things like fuel cost, driving things like logistics and other things. So yeah, it's been a interesting time to be a leader.
Yes.
And from a perspective on Lumentum, on the one hand, we sell products that enable communications. We're a photonics company, so a lot of our products are used in the telecommunication and transportation industries. And so we've had a high demand for many of our products, which has been lovely. We've been able to meet that demand for the most part, but we've also wrestled with some significant supply chain challenges ourselves as factories shut down periodically because local governments have instituted a policy or something like that. It's been interesting.
Well, and when we talked earlier about this, you made a really interesting point about the cadence of decision making and how much that has changed for technology leaders. And it really rang a recognition bell with me because I've been hearing that expressed in one way or the other by lots of other tech leaders. Tell us about the impact of that on you and your leadership at Lumentum, and what sort of things actually changed that brought about that observation.
Well, it's interesting. I think we've always been a company that prided ourselves on being kind of small enough and nimble enough to meet the needs of our customers and to be proactive in the marketplace and other things. But that was a physical marketplace where most of our competition were also big geographically distributed companies. So something as simple as, hey, we need an approval for a capital project, and then we're going to need to approve the purchase orders or other things to support that. It might take a week or more to get a meeting on the calendar to get the right 5 executives to have time to talk, because 3 of them are in a plane somewhere, one of them is in the wrong time zone, another has a customer meeting. And so it's really hard to get 5 people in a room together, so to speak, when those are high-powered, busy executives. Well, now it takes minutes to get 5 people in a room because they're all sitting in a room at home at the end of a camera. And you can squeeze 5 or 10 minutes in to have an important conversation in between all the other important conversations, or you can tack it on the morning or evening. So it's a lot easier to schedule the conversation than it used to be, just because of the logistics. Second, I think we were all trying to make very informed, data-driven, decisions around risk and other things. And I think we still do that, but I think we've become a little less paralyzed by the analysis. So we're not asking people to go back and do another round of the analysis or go update this spreadsheet and whatnot, because we understand that if you're slow to move, then maybe the person that decided the first week that we need to do, we need to stock, safety stock and inventory needs to increase because of risk, captured that stock, and the people that waited 2 weeks to make that decision missed some of that inventory because somebody made a decision quicker than them. So our ability to make informed decisions more quickly, both because of the physical logistics and I think our sense of balancing risk and reward for being a first mover, has kind of fundamentally changed in the company.
Yeah. Well, and there has been, you mentioned the supply chain challenges that pretty much every company across different industries has experienced. But at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was expanding their networks and doing a lot of that. Those first 6 months were pretty crazy busy with that. But the greatest shortages right now, especially for chips, we were talking about this, that it seems to be more on lower end. Explain the impact that's been having for Lumentum.
So a lot of the chips in really high demand and therefore in shortages right now are some of the less expensive, kind of to some degree less complicated chips that fewer and fewer people make, right? Because people want to make the big, complex, high margin chip that they can make more revenue on. So over time, many of these chips have devolved to where 1 or 2 manufacturers make 95% of the chips in the world that are consumed in that category. And then what's happened is the demand for those chips has really spiked because those chips are used in, to do build network modules that connect and enable network communication largely. They're also used in the automotive supply chain. They're also used in other electronic devices. And as the number of chips in every car has dramatically risen, the number of chips being used in other applications have increased. And frankly, things like the global rise of cryptocurrencies and the technology, the chips and compute cycles, technology consumed in the mining operations there is significant. So it put big demand on these chip manufacturers. Again, there's only a couple in the world supplying most of those chips. And then on top of that, the lead time to ramp capacity, it isn't like you can just sort of throw another few workers on the line. If you've got a reactor and a set of processes, it may take years to increase volume by adding more reactor capacity. And when you can get so much by improving yield and some other things, but it's a complex problem where demand spikes are really difficult to fulfill against in a model where your lead time to bring on new capacity is challenged.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I talked about that with you earlier that I think our audience will find really interesting is how this changed your relationship and the conversations you were having with your CEO. And that has had a very strong trickle down effect through into how you run IT at Lumentum. Let's talk about things like your IT monthly planning, which used to be something fairly sacred in most technology leaders in your toolkit, and your CEO. Let's talk about what your CEO, how he changed your thinking on that early on, probably within the first year of the pandemic, right?
Yeah. So one of the reasons I came to Lumentum was for Alan Lowe as our CEO. Really fabulous leader, incredibly experienced in this industry, and also a very transparent and approachable and candid leadership style, which really resonates with the way I work. And Alan would challenge me like, I know IT is really busy and we're spending lots of money and you're doing lots of projects, but like, how do I know we're working on the right projects?
Yeah.
And why did you do that project and not the other one? Because Jason's project is that more important than Misha's project, or is that more important than Sharon's project? And defend to me which one is which one has the highest value. Why are we doing that?
Yeah.
And honestly, I began to realize I really couldn't give him a good answer. I could talk about though this is critical for our ability to enter a new market, or this is a regulatory requirement, and therefore it's a risk we need to achieve, and so on. But it was difficult for me to, in a quantitative way, sort of compare the projects. It was also very difficult to respond to the fact that IT essentially was an annual planning process. When you're a business that is kind of capital intensive, like manufacturing business, and you are very careful about how you manage OpEx margins and so on, which I think most businesses are, but certainly we are. You look very closely at your G&A costs, your SG&A costs, and make sure that you're managing those in a way that are certainly supportive of the business, but also are controlled. And so our focus was largely on hitting a predictable set of project delivery for a very predictable cost. And the best way to do that is to look a year out and then really manage things very closely.
Yeah.
Well, of course, that's great until the entire world economy
until it isn't, right? Yeah.
And then what do you do? And so you're making these ad hoc decisions around reprioritizing your product, your full portfolio that you spent 3 months, getting alignment on what you were going to do or not do. So it wasn't working. And so a bunch of really, challenging conversations where Alan and our head of sales and others were kind of saying, hey, this isn't working. IT needs to change the way they're working. And we tried a couple of like, oh, well, what if we met with you more often and talked about demand? And it's like, well, that's fine. We can talk all we want, but it doesn't, how are we changing and how are we measuring things? So kind of long story short, what we've done is we're now building, we're kind of mirroring the business. So the business, again, we make things, many of those things have very long lead times. So we have an annual plan. We have a quarterly plan. Well, the business also has a monthly rolling demand update. So we reforecast on a regular basis, looking at priorities, demand, supply issues, and we constantly are essentially updating our S&OP process, our sales and operations planning process, to optimize for the business. Yeah. So IT needed to do the same thing, and boy, is that hard, right? Because we have decades of IT not doing that sort of demand sensing and demand refresh. Yeah. The good news is we had also begun an agile transformation, moving away from traditional delivery models to more of a scaled agile methodology in the way we're delivering a lot of our projects, which lends itself to this idea of looking at backlog and using a Scrunban and picking kind of the work we're going to do this month and doing that work and so on. So we took that at an operational level, and then we went back to our planning process that was annual and really married the two and kind of found a happy medium. So now we're doing, I think, a much better job of measuring, of assessing the potential impact of projects in multiple categories. Well, but where do they align to one of the strategic impacts, our top level goals as a company? Second, are they, how are they urgent, intermediate need? Are they midterm need or long-term need? And then things like, I like the team T-shirt sizing, but it's this sort of small, medium, large effort and small, medium, or large impact, right? So we wanted to get away from these complex ROI calculations that
Yes.
that have to be 4 digits of decimal precise, and everybody has to sign in blood on. And so no, we're looking directionally. How big is it? How
Yeah.
big is the impact?
Yeah.
And it's done a great job of allowing us to have really meaningful conversations across the business now, and to begin comparing projects across different business units or different functions for relative value.
Yeah.
And so I would say we're probably not all the way to where we need to be, but we're certainly now doing a much more effective job at quarterly forecasting and planning, and we're having the conversation monthly, and we're getting better at kind of ramping that demand plan on a monthly basis.
And Ralph, did you find that your decade of service on the TBM Council, the Technology Business Management folks, were there practices and were there things that could get dusted off and help with that? Or are organizations like the TBM Council also making big changes in the recommendations they make? This is all around running IT like a business, which, gosh, we've been talking about that for a long time, and now you're experiencing the thrill of it.
Yeah, we have. So yes and yes. So yes, the experience there has been really helpful and really fundamental. One, because there's a literally thousands, over 5,000 practitioners of TBM who are members of the council and share their insights and share what they're doing, which is always a learning process, always helpful to enhance thinking and experience. The other thing is, so TBM started out largely in the area of kind of IT chargeback and showback and transparency and building kind of service costing models and things like that. So fairly traditional approaches to that, although it was really aligned toward this idea of value streams and understanding the value of investments. But increasingly with things looking at scaled agile, so the council has updated its models to look at people doing agile delivery. It's updated models to deal with things like cloud spend, which is a much more dramatic and variable spend than traditional IT investment in servers and storage and so on used to be. So I think TBM has done a nice job of keeping up with the times and in fact driving the conversation toward modern delivery models and modern value measures.
Okay, excellent. Well, and I want to move on next to what this meant for your project management office and how it runs differently. But before we do that, we have a question from our listening and watching audience. To what degree are you seeing enterprises and probably other CIOs as well embracing end-to-end software-defined networking to support these changing business needs? Has that become a much bigger deal in the last year to 2 years than you had seen before? Because I know you're always on top of these trends.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I remember decades ago where we were all moving from fixed wide area networks to MPLS, these networks defined by essentially a cloud that your carrier managed for you. Well, I think MPLS networks have now faded. And now what most people are running is some sort of software-defined infrastructure. You may have occasionally some physical network connectivity that is managed classically, but increasingly software-defined networks are, in fact, they allow you to manage some of the dynamic variability of traffic. And they've really done a nice job of allowing us to adapt to some of the ongoing kind of challenges from a cybersecurity perspective, which we can talk about later. The other thing I think increasingly, not only software-defined networks from a WAN perspective, the backbone of the corporate interconnectivity, but software-defined endpoints. So it used to be, it was I'd log into my computer, and then if I'm remote, I would start a VPN, and I would make a tunnel back to the corporate network, then I would do my work. Well, increasingly, a lot of people are using kind of zero trust model or software-defined endpoint models where it's transparent. I don't have to start a VPN. If I try to connect to an address that is inside the corporate network, the computer and software on that endpoint is aware and creates that secure tunnel on an application by application basis. It's not routing all the traffic from my PC through the corporate network and so on. And our ability to set policy from a security perspective and information perspective on that endpoint is much more sophisticated than it ever was with a kind of binary model of on or off with a VPN.
Yeah. All right. Good. It was a good question and a very good answer. Thank you. Let's circle back and talk about your PMO, your Project Management Office. You remarked to me that it's really entirely different today because of the way you're measuring success is different. Were those changes to the PMO that you started making when you arrived in late 2018, or was this more in response to the new way of doing business throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, I will say we started a while ago. So our PMO was a fairly traditional PMO, and unfortunately, I think the focus was, hey, you always want to have straight A report card, right? You always want everything to be green because that makes people happy.
Yeah.
And so we spent a lot of time when I first arrived at Lumentum working on the PMO to become more transparent. The goal isn't to get a good report card. The goal is to stimulate the right conversation. Do we have the right resources? So in fact, I'm a bit of a stickler or I like semantics. So we don't call our IT governance team, which is where PMO typically resides, governance. We call it the IT enablement organization. Because you look up the term govern in the dictionary, and it's things like to throttle, to slow down, to limit, which a governor
to control. Yeah.
And I don't want that mentality. And so our view is your goal isn't to limit project success. Your goal is to enable project success with the right resources at the right time, with the right information, so that we can make informed decisions about how we deliver. And we've done a lot of work on that within our PMO, and not by we, I truly mean the PMO team. We've got a great leadership team there, great PMO individual contributors, and they've done a fabulous job of improving our transparency, improving how we report and what we report on, including things like we have what's called an A4, a document we created at the beginning that says, what's the expected value that this will deliver? What are the changes to run rate or other things? And then we hold ourselves to, we won't start a project without it. And then at the end, we're doing a much better job of measuring value achieved and a feedback loop around how we do that.
Yeah.
We're also doing a better job of having not just the SteerCo kind of conversations, but the entire portfolio, project portfolio we review within IT on a monthly basis. We review with the entire leadership team of the company on a quarterly basis to understand, 84% of projects are green and they're on time, on spec, on budget. Others might be yellow. Well, why are they yellow? By the way, yellow is not bad. Sometimes yellow means we made a choice to prioritize something over something else.
Right.
And therefore, we elected to delay a project. It's okay. But we're still going to measure it based on its original commit date and things like that. So much better conversation in around PMO. And to the point where some of the other PMOs in the company have kind of come to us and asked to use our templates and listen to our method, which is always a huge...
Yes. Yeah. That's actually better than straight A's on a report card. When you get colleagues on the business side that are like, we think the way you're doing this could be a model and we would like to follow it. It also strikes me that it takes a lot of the politics out of the whole process, because a lot of times PMOs are governed by the more powerful business executives of the more revenue producing units in a company, whatever that company is. So you end up playing a game of favorites. And I'm sure that there's no way with human beings involved that there isn't some of that somewhere. But at least this way, you've got all these different dimensions that you look at things.
Well, and we actually try to dimensionalize the bias, if you will.
Really?
So there's all these objective measures. And then there's a column that's sort of like, the executive priority call. So there is a bit of a flag that a CEO can come in and say, yeah, I know what the numbers say, but this is important. We're going to do it.
Okay.
And that's okay. Yep. But we're explicit about why we did it and when we did it. And that way we're not, you're not going back and somebody's not fudging the numbers to make it look like it fits just so you make the boss happy.
Right. Well, and you mentioned something else too about that this is something that the sales team has also been trained on at Lumentum, the challenger mindset. Tell us about what that is. That what you've been talking about, or is that something a little different?
Yeah, it's very much like that. It's a little different, but similar. So the idea, less about PMO, but more about the way we work as an IT organization. So again, the challenger mindset, it's a industry term. We've used it to take our sales team across that kind of training. But the idea is data has shown over time with many, many companies and many relationships that people who are essentially yes people, that just sort of say yes to everything, they're trying to be really polite and just nice to everybody and appease everybody, aren't looked at as highly is people who are basically honest with you and occasionally challenge you
Yeah.
and say, that's an interesting request. However, I think you may want to consider this other IT because you may not be aware of this, and this, or, obviously it's not a license to be a jerk, right? It's not about being argumentative, but it's about having a creative tension and a positive tension and sharing of ideas. And that happens in a Socratic model where there are often, people kind of at odds with each other. And that ends up with a much more effective outcome than the kind of typical, the old IT order taker kind of role.
Right.
And now the model is much more around, hey, how do we be an effective partner? So to make the story not too much longer, so back when I was at the Clorox company, we coined the term. So we had a lot of people, business relationship management, BRMs within the IT framework, engaging with the business. And we talked about the term I used was be a lens, not a mirror. And the explanation of that was if I'm a mirror, I go and I sit across the table from the CFO and they ask me for a bunch of stuff and I take notes on my notepad, and then I go back and then the joke I usually make is then I come back and we agree how much we're mutually going to be disappointed because we can't do it all, and so on. But to be a lens is you take multiple sources of light, multiple sources of inspiration and information, and you focus those things on the problem. So I'm not just mirroring back what I'm asked for, the information I was given. I've got a breadth of experience and knowledge. And frankly, I think this applies to some of the diversity and inclusion conversation we're having lately. Having people from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different ways of thinking really can enhance your problem solving and enhance your ability to meet the market or meet the needs of the organization. So being a lens is about applying some of that outside thinking to problems differently. And that's similar to applying the challenger mindset.
Yeah. Well, and it actually ties in very well to our next question that we have. But before I throw that one at you, this is also reminding me that in an almost overcorrection, a lot of IT leaders, they didn't want to be the department of no. So they became the department of yes to everybody. And that, of course, what has that done to the workload in IT? Or what would that do to anybody's workload? So it's really nice that these different considerations are kind of normalizing all of that and actually making IT much more like what it has always wanted to be, which is a very strategic player in the business decisions. There was never really much beyond that was the nirvana.
To respond really quickly to that. So a dear friend of mine who's a great CIO, who's now built a consulting business. She was CIO for a sports franchise. And she actually coined the term, I think patented it and created like hats and t-shirts. And the term was FOTC, find a way to say yes. And that was what she was kind of teaching her team because they had an issue where they kind of weren't engaged in providing great customer service and being responsive. So, which I think is a great idea, but you can take that to the extreme. You don't want to be just, again, I really abhor the term backlog. It's IT backlog because there's a sense of like somehow you did something wrong. There's an IT backlog. You guys can't keep up. So I prefer the term. So I prefer to think of it as it's like a household budget. You've got a household, and say you need to put a new roof on, and maybe you want to put a pool in to enjoy the summers, and you want to go on a family vacation, and you want to get a new car. Well, you can't do them all. So you decide what your priorities are because you have a certain amount of income and a certain amount of choices. And then you decide, well, this year we're going to do the pool, and next year, and we won't go on a vacation because we'll enjoy the pool instead. And next year we're going to do the roof, and so on. And you make choices based on the situation and the income and the priorities of the family. It's no different in a business. What you have is a set of business choices based on what's important to you and your affordability, and then you make those choices collectively as a team. There's no backlog. Nobody should feel guilty or bad about all the work that you want to do. Those are just goals and aspirations.
Well, it reminds me a little bit too of the famous three-legged stool where you can have only 2 out of 3, faster, cheaper, better. And once you pick the 2, you don't get the third one. Okay, well, we might want to argue with this next question then, because the question is about what do you do to create visibility for IT and its contribution to the business? We as tech people are always focused on technology and implementation, which I might take issue with that. I mean, I certainly think that's the primary focus, but how do you respond to that, Ralph?
Well, So again, it used to drive me crazy back in the day. People would talk about IT not having a quote unquote seat at the table.
Oh, cool.
And my flippant response was usually, if you want a seat at the table, then pull up a chair.
Bring your chair.
And
Yes.
so the idea being, don't wait for an invitation. If you want a seat at the table, my experience is when you get a seat at the table by providing value,
Yes.
by having a reason somebody would want you there, to the point where at some point people look and go, hey, how come IT's not here? We really need their opinion on this.
That's right.
Right. That's when you know you are engaging and creating value.
You're embedded.
Now, the other thing is IT people are really like historically and I think statistically terrible at telling their own story. We're just really bad at marketing.
Totally agree.
And so I think it's really important for not just to the business, but for your own employees, your own organization to feel pride in what we're doing. So we, for instance, one of the things we did this year is we created, and we call it our IT sizzle reel. It is a video of some of the amazing work that the team has done in the last year, the projects we've delivered, the value generated to the business.
That is so smart.
It was played at our our national sales kickoff. People were kind of blown away, found it really engaged. And again, sort of surprising, like, wow, I had no idea IT did all of that last year. Wow.
Yeah.
And it's fun to have the IT team is like, that's cool.
Yeah.
The business is like, that's interesting. And again, it's not about blowing your own horn or thumping your chest, but it's about acknowledging some of the great work people are doing and the alignment and the impact we're having on the business.
But if you don't at some point stop to blow your own horn a little bit, who else is going to? I mean, this is I have an ongoing battle every time I try. I talk to a CIO and I've looked at their LinkedIn profile and it looks like they maybe updated it right after they got out of high school. And, I'm like, why aren't you in this? Oh, well, I'm not looking for a job right now. I don't have. It's like, no, it's not about that. Yep. It's actually about your executive presence in the world. And for IT leaders, it's their executive presence in their own businesses.
When I was at Clorox, I had a conversation with our EVP of strategy who I reported to, Frank Tatasha, great leader, wonderful man. And he pulled me aside and asked me, I was speaking, I was being quoted in CIO magazine. I was speaking at events and he was like, why are you spending so much time outside the company? Like, don't you have an organization to run? And I'm like, Frank, I am running that's what I'm doing. He goes, what do you mean? I said, so listen, here we are, a 100-year-old CPG company based in the Bay Area, competing for time and talent and partners and engagement with vendors and others with everybody else. So why is somebody who's some great engineer fresh out of school or some experienced leader going to choose to come to Clorox? Well, if their perception is the last ad they saw on TV or that their mom has it in their laundry room. Yeah. Like what I need to do is I need them to understand we're doing innovative things. It's a really cool place to work. There's neat stuff going on here. And not only for pride of employee and retention and engagement from the employee base. They love to hear the great stories in their own media of what they're doing. Yeah. Attracting new people and frankly, attracting partners who, if I'm a startup and I'm doing some interesting technology, am I going to want to partner with kind of what's perceived as being a kind of boring old CPG company? Or do I want to partner with someone doing something innovative and sexy? Yep. Well, to the degree I can present ourselves that way, I attract more investment from startups, and therefore we end up with more innovation and more IT.
And I don't think this has ever been done, but I wish some big marketing entity would do some sort of a study about how much visibility of the CIO and talking about the innovative work going on in their technology or their digital organizations, how much that has done to attract talent. Because I don't think I've spoken to a CIO in the last probably 10 years who hasn't listed the war on talent and the need for talent, and we've got to find the right talent. That's always in the top three, along with cybersecurity and digital transformation. Those have been kind of the big three. All right, let me see. Our audience is still listening out there. Let's move into talking about your strategic technology and business priorities going forward. What would you say has shifted much higher up your list now than maybe it was 6 to 12 months ago?
Yeah, well, obviously, we all have a lot more concern about hybrid, remote, digital in the way we work.
Flexibility,
It used to be, you're worried about your conference bridge and the video conferencing for those discrete video conferences you have every now and then. Now we all live there. And so it's a collaborative platform, and not just video, but generally the way the company collaborates and communicates and stays connected is important. There are a number of tools in that space, not just the core platform stuff. And then processes and other things around that. The other thing that's really become, it's always been important, but boy, have the stakes gone up, and as the landscape changed, has been cybersecurity. You now have to, it used to be, I worried a lot about protecting the corporate network or maybe a device when it was periodically off the network. Now I'm worried about securing thousands of devices in people's homes.
Yes.
And then I worry about the other devices on that network in that home. And how do I protect the PC from the webcam that may have been hacked, or the PS5 that maybe may have malware on it, and so on. So zero trust and worrying about kind of a different security model is front of mind. And now unfortunately, with much of what's happening in Eastern Europe, cyber hacking and state-sponsored hacking and other things are really concerning. So keeping a strong eye on what's happening in that space is important.
And how do you go about doing that? I know that you have, and I know there's a limited amount that you can or can't say. You have the CSO reports directly to you, and you had mentioned your IT enablement efforts. And I think you told me something about how you've separated some of that out so there can be more focus in the security area, kind of watching emerging tech in that area. Tell us what you can about that.
Yeah, so our CISO, fantastic, Amit Bhardwaj. Amit's been my CISO at Lumentum, and speaking of talent, I've been very pleased in that he's worked for me now in 3 different companies. So he's had the I'd say he has the poor judgment to have followed me twice to other other challenges.
And now you're just fishing for a compliment there. Don't give me that.
But he has a fantastic CISO, and again, we work really well together and understand the risk and how to approach it.
Yeah.
And not only does Amit own our cybersecurity element, he really one of the things I've tasked him with is keeping up with sort of scanning technology, keeping up with startups in the security and other spaces. Having a primary relationship with many of our venture capital partners and the VC firms or PE firms that have startup portfolios, and will often take our problem set, and he'll go engage with them, build agendas, and then bring set up meetings where we can take the rest of the leadership team through some interesting work different startups are doing, or in many cases it's not even a startup per se, but it's the thesis the venture capital firm has about a particular space. So it's a chance to share information, become educated, and stay current in what's happening in the world. And then again, ideally to partner early with some of those players, both to take advantage of some of their innovation, but also to be able to express our challenges and encourage them to work on solving those challenges within their platforms.
Right. To have almost is this an incubator type relationship? You had mentioned that there's a Lumentum Ventures. You have an entity now. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Lumentum Ventures is an entity within Lumentum that focuses on, it's led by one of our SVPs who also runs our field sales team and some other things. And it's really focused on how do we take some of the great technology and the great innovation Lumentum has built over the years and find new markets, new customers, and new ways to approach to solve problems. And so it's got a very venture mindset. Now, it's not about investing necessarily as a fund, but it's about that mindset of a VC and looking at those opportunities and trying to create work there. So IT has essentially modeled that and done similar things. So we have a bit of a Lumentum, kind of IT ventures kind of model where we engage the IT organization and others within the company around ideas, challenges they see, and opportunities. And then we're trying to, create a bit of an incubator to go solve those problems, test those solutions out, and do what I think IT does really well. Is I coined the term again a decade or so ago. People used to talk about shadow IT, the stuff that the business is doing under the shadow without IT seeing. And I coined the term shallow IT, and I embrace this. I said, shadow IT sounds like a thing. It's in the shadows and hidden.
Yeah, it sounds sneaky.
I look at it. No, the business is doing really smart things. They're finding they have problems, and they're solving that problem in the best way they can.
Yeah.
And so, an example again, while I was at Clorox, they partnered with a guy, Grant LaMontagne was the head of sales. and Grant's sales team there were about 30 people in the sales team who we found were taking files out of our SharePoint sales portal and dragging them out every week into a cloud-based storage platform, and then using that on their mobile devices to talk to customers. And so we engaged with them. And at first they were like, "Ooh, are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong?" And we're like, no. Like we like what you've done.
Yeah.
Because what they've done is they figured out a problem. Hey, I've got 15 minutes with a store manager while I'm walking down an aisle, or I've got 5 minutes. I'm not going to stop and open up my laptop and boot it up and log into VPN and bring up the SharePoint portal and show you a file, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to open up my mobile. I'm going to pull up the file that's right there because I prepped for the meeting and it's cached there, and I'm going to open it, and we're going to have a conversation in those 5 minutes that's meaningful.
Yeah.
Well, I can't do that. So we didn't know. IT was delivering what we thought was the working solution.
Yeah.
And so, hey, you guys have identified, not only did you identify a problem, you've identified a solution to go with it.
Right.
And you've proven its value. Look, it works. People will use it and it works. So what IT does is IT then did what we do really well. We take shallow and go deep. Hey, that poor salesperson taking 40 files a week and syncing them, I can do that. I can solve that for you. I'll build an automated sync. We'll cache it. I can also do what IT does really well. I can make sure it's regulatory compliant, that it's secure, that we're not sharing inappropriate information, et cetera. And so IT says, great, you found the nugget. Now let me refine that and create a service that everybody can benefit from.
Let's
and that to me is an idea of what shallow IT means.
Well, and I remember somebody years ago said that there was shadow innovation was another way to look at it. And I'm sure it was a CIO who told me that. And that was a CIO who's paying attention to what's happening on the business side and then stepping in and saying, "Oh, cool, you thought of a way to do this. Let us help you do it better." So that's actually great. When I had asked you about business and tech priorities that had moved further up your list, and one of the things you also mentioned that I think we could take a stop on and talk a little bit about how in the past we may have taken employee productivity for granted, and that now it's a much more strategic focus. And tell us what you've done about that at Lumentum, because I understand you're about to do your first global survey about IT services.
Yeah. So again, the assumption was everybody's working while you're at the office, you're productive, you're doing things. Well, at first, when we shifted to remote work, well, all that meant was we spent more time on, video conferences, glued to our chairs in our home offices. And then even worse, it was you were glued to your chair for the 8 or 10 hours of your primary time zone. And then you were also for another 5 or 6 hours for Europe or Asia or some other time zone you're operating in. And everybody was getting pretty tired and pretty burned out pretty quickly. And it was clear the tools were essentially trying to model a meeting, online, and it just wasn't getting it all done.
Yeah.
So changing the way you look at both how you organize work, how you organize meetings and other things, but changing the nature of how you interact to focus more on the outcome of what you're looking for as opposed to the activity of, meeting. And we, for instance, in 2 years, this is the third or fourth time the executive leadership has rebuilt the executive calendar around how often we meet, what we meet for, who we meet with, and the topics covered. Because we're continuing to try to innovate around how do we make sure we're most effectively spending the executive time together and apart to drive productivity across the business. And then we cascade that across the teams as well. And one of the things, we do an annual employee survey around engagement and other things from a corporate culture perspective.
Sure.
But it's been a while since we've done an IT survey of, hey, are the tools we're providing effective? Or what do you like, what don't you like? And not just the tools, but the processes and how I get support, how I provision things and so on. So we're really trying to go deep and get some insight as to what's working and not, so we can continue to do the same and adapt IT's approach to delivering tools, services, and technology to better enable productivity across the workforce.
Okay, great. That makes sense. It sounds like another way to kind of dredge out some of that potential for shadow innovation. If there's a problem here.
A lot of time with our team before we released the survey, explaining that feedback is a gift, and that we in many ways we don't want a survey to come back and say it's all green.
Yeah.
Like I really want the survey to come back with some raw feedback so that we understand where there's opportunity and we can go do something about it.
Yes, that's a great idea. Let's pivot over and talk about your data strategy. Because every time I ask someone about, say, their cloud strategy, they'll say, well, cloud is wonderful. It's an enabling platform. But what really matters is what we're doing with data analysis and how we are. And what is the phrase you told me? You said you want everyone in the organization to treat data like milk. The fresher, the better. Okay. So what have you changed there and what are you doing?
Yeah, so twofold. On the cloud comment, again, I like to play with words, and some of the people ask, "What's your cloud strategy?" My flippant response is usually, "I don't have one. I have a business strategy, and the cloud is a solution, a tool that can help achieve that strategy at times."
Yeah.
So I don't have a strategy that says cloud is good and on-prem is bad. That's not true all the time. So, for instance, if you run a factory, edge computing is really important because I need things close and so on. So. But to answer your question about data, the challenge is we have more and more data. And most companies have plenty of data. It's not lack of data that's your problem. It's finding. It's the old adage about a needle in a haystack. That would be easy. Our problem we have a needle in a stack full of needles. Right? It's hard to find the right one. And so
that sounds painful, Ralph.
Yeah. So often we've got data we generated, say, from our transactional systems, and that's updated on a cadence, a weekly, monthly, quarterly cadence. We have data that we've generated from our manufacturing floor, which is real time, coming off of systems and testers and so on. We have data that's coming from our customers, and we have data coming from our suppliers. And merging and marrying all that data, harmonizing that data so that you've got key indexes that you can use to align and search on is challenging. But among all of that, with big data and data lakes and data warehouses, I can solve much of that. The problem then is timeliness. So my weekly data coming out of a transactional system like ERP, my daily data from the factory floor, and then my weekly data I might get from a contract manufacturer, they may not harmonize on which day they all got updated. By the time they get into the front end, they're filtered and processed and stored in a table, and it may be 2 or 3 weeks old. Now I'm making decisions based on stale milk. What I really want is fresh data. The fresher, the better. And so we've deployed a strategy that the term's been coined a lake house. So it's a combination of a data lake and a data warehouse, right? A data warehouse is really good at structured data with relationships and building, 3D cubes and so on. A lake is often this unstructured pool of data without a lot of semantics on top of it. So we want the best of both. I want the structured data to be able to do really deep analysis and reporting and understanding those relationships. I also want the freshest data I can get. I don't want to have to do it twice. So we're actually using a technology from a company called Databricks that allows us to create a combination data warehouse, data lake, a lake house, so to speak. And so that the data loading is happening almost real time, and people that really care about freshness can access that data directly with our visualization layer. And then that same data is processed and stored in a longer term way so that I can go back and do long-term analysis on it later without having to have a separate copy.
Can you point out something that has made a very big difference to the business, or that the CEO has been thrilled to see, where a result of the lake house, a party out on the porch of the lake house about something that was done?
Well, so one use case is we've got an interesting. So we have a wafer fab in Japan that makes chips, and the data that they use and the way their system had historically been built did not align ordinally. So the XY axis of, say, a wafer was not consistent. It's not the same XY axis where the origin point was not placed in the same point as a wafer, say, generated in our UK facility. So if you begin to compare data and understand, hey, how can we get better yield or whatever, the first thing you'd have to do is some engineer would have to spend hours remapping the coordinates and normalizing the data and trying to figure out, to see if I've got commonality or a repeating pattern or whatnot. Well, one of the things we've done is we've normalized that. So we now have the same ordinate, the same basis of beginning on every wafer globally. So now it's much easier to do comparison across that entire data set, because that data, I don't have a lag where I've got to process, translate, and then analyze. it's all kind of real time and normalized across that data because I've harmonized that data set in the data lake or in the lake house when it comes in.
Okay. And you had mentioned another example of something that has worked really well. And again, going on in one of your Japanese factories about to walk up and show an idea to use your cell phone camera. Talk about that. I found that eminently understandable. It was like, what a great way to.
One of our IT innovation ideas coming out of our team in Sagamihara, our IT leadership team. And what they observed was that we have operators, and many of them don't speak English as a native first language, or maybe don't speak English at all. They're operating something on the factory floor, and they have an idea. They notice, hey, this is interesting. This is a particular challenge in this process. I have an idea how to make it better. Well, the way we would currently work is they would have to step away from the station, go to a computer terminal somewhere with a keyboard and log in, and then in English type in a idea that would be submitted as a ticket, and someone would go, well, so it just the barrier to entry is so high nobody does it. Like it just isn't done.
Yeah.
And the acuity of what you get is not great because you don't really know what they're talking about. You can't see it. It's just words. And so again, Nakura-san had this idea. Hey, what if we put a camera? We could video. The person could literally on their station kind of turn, talk to the camera, show the camera, this is what I'm talking about, and speak in their native language and say, here's an opportunity or here's a challenge I think we could fix. You could capture that. I can then feed that into our Kaizen team, our continuous improvement teams on the factory floor, who can then take that and use data and other things and improve that process and get this environment improved accordingly. So just a simple idea, but a really powerful idea to change outcomes.
Yeah, I thought that was very neat, especially the way, it overcomes several hurdles that probably in the good old days before we could meet and talk so quickly over video conferencing, that probably would have taken months to figure out and get in place, and it's almost immediately demonstrable this way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let me see, while we're talking about people and coming up with enjoyable ideas, talent acquisition strategies. That is always a very big, we've hit on, that's the number one in the top three with most CIOs. What are you doing anything differently to bring in talent, or are you finding that your attrition rate is very low? How is that looking for you these days?
Well,
you're in Silicon Valley, so you've got significant competition. Yeah. Yeah.
First, you should focus on talent retention strategy. Like how do I make the people I have happy and productive and engaged so that they stay and they tell their friends what a great place it is to work.
Okay. Great point. Yep.
Right. One of the best things is to have it, everybody wants to go to a party where everybody's happy. So we want everybody to be happy at the party. And there are a bunch of things we're doing around work-life balance and empowering teams and a number of things to kind of really keep our IT workforce energized and engaged and healthy in the long run. On top of that, we have done things like many people have done. We've taken certain roles and said, you know what, these are now remote or hybrid where, we'd love you to be in the office periodically, but you don't have to be. And so we can give you flexibility.
Sure.
So many of people might be in a place in their life where, I would love to go work for Lumentum, but I can't because I have this or that, that prevents me from being in San Jose 5 days a week. And so we can work around that and access essentially a larger talent pool in that regard. The other thing we've done is we've really tried to give people the flexibility to do the job kind of on their time and in their way.
Okay.
So I don't care if you are show up in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning and leave at 5 or clock in and clock out. If you work 2 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon and 4 hours later, as long as the outcome happens and the work gets done, in many cases, because we're a global company, working things through multiple time zones is actually beneficial. So we've done a lot more around giving people the power to make their own life work by being flexible around how and when they work and getting things done.
Yeah.
And that also means a lot of focus on culture, and a lot of focus on culture. So we hire mostly for attitude, team fit, the way you think, your mindset, and a little bit on skills.
Yeah.
Because the skills are often the things I can work on. It's really hard to change someone's mindset.
Yeah. Well, and that echoes back to what brought you to the company in the first place, because you enjoyed so much the conversations you had with the CEO. And also you mentioned the head of HR was someone that you were very impressed with.
Probably the two biggest reasons I came to Lumentum were Alan and Sharon, who has since retired. But I found both of them very refreshing in that they were both very easy to read. They were who they said they were.
Yeah.
They spoke simply and straightforwardly. You never were guessing what happened. And from an HR perspective, I found Sharon one of the most refreshing HR people I'd worked with.
Yeah.
Because she didn't come across as a HR person. She just came across as a practical, business-minded person who was trying to solve problems.
Yes. Well, and you certainly have had you've had plenty of exposure to lots of HR in moving around through different companies. Let's pivot over to talk a little bit about emerging tech trends that are of particular interest to you. I always poke around and find out if anybody is suddenly taken up with blockchain, and that's not something that is high on your list. And I suspect it's probably in the AI and machine learning area. But tell us, what you watch and what you're really most interested in these days.
Yeah. So AI and ML is very interesting. I think there's this idea or a promise long-term that AI as a utility and machine learning as a modality end up embedded in more and more things, and we use them as sort of tools in our tool chest. Today, the state of the industry is largely AI and ML embedded in solutions you consume as a service. So it's somebody else is running the AI and ML, and you're consuming a chatbot that helps you interact with your service desk, or you're consuming, something along those lines, right? So we have not yet in large scale are people programming their own or training their own models for machine learning array. Some people are, but in large scale, you're consuming a service where somebody else has done that, and you're applying that service to a business process or problem. So I think the future means we're going to start seeing more and more people building their own and training their own models. And that will change the shape of many platforms and IT organizations. And you'll have to, by nature, have to be much closer to the data source in the business.
Right. You'll be spending a lot more time in the lake house, right?
Yeah. The other thing that I think is super interesting, and we're really at the beginning of, and you're going to see a lot of people kind of mock it and pshaw it as gaming and so on, is this idea of AR and VR. I won't comment on Meta and what I think about the Meta plans and landscape, but I will say practical applications of augmented reality and virtual reality in real use cases, in real work, in real companies delivering real value are beginning to happen now. And I think you'll see more and more as the technology becomes affordable, more capable, and has some of the characteristics that work better in an enterprise environment. You'll see those tools brought to bear in really interesting ways to solve problems really differently.
Okay. And one of my last questions here, I want to ask about how the sustainableIT.org, how this board chairmanship came about. I understand that it's brand new. I mean, it was announced earlier this month, but give us kind of the elevator pitch on that about why you're so interested, because you have many places you could devote your time.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this organization. We've just begun it, as we said. It's a nonprofit. It's formed and led by a number of technology executives. And the common goal here is we all want to advance sustainability around the world through technology leadership. And so our mission is to do things like define sustainable transformation programs, author best practices and frameworks, set standards, maybe certifications in this space, do education and training work, and fundamentally raise awareness for environmental and societal programs that make our organizations and make the world a more sustainable place for generations to come. So things like best practices, research and standards, global awareness, community education and training, and then transparency, helping people do a better job of kind of, again, back to the idea of the data lake and normalizing that with ordinance. If we can get to a point where we're defining things in a similar way, using the same taxonomy, using similar approaches, we can begin to share more openly, accelerate our ability to align more effectively to some of these opportunities. And these include things like sustainability in the environmental and
Yes.
energy sense, but also sustainability in the societal sense. You know, are these the things we're doing helping or hindering society? Are we aware of, say, in our sourcing relationships or partnering relationships? Are we working with organizations that are providing opportunity for, for all of the people of the world, or just certain classes of people, and so on?
Well, it seems like it comes at a good time, too, because most boards of directors now have very high on their agenda the whole ESG area, environmental, societal, and governance. And the data that is going to be tracking that and responding to the different regulations is all clearly going to need to be managed and produced and sustained by IT. So it seems like a good time to do it.
In some ways, the inspiration here was similar to the founding a decade ago of the TBM Council. Is we're all out here trying to align and understand how we just better support the ESG initiatives and better support our companies and our communities. And instead of all figuring out in a room by ourselves, we thought it'd be better if we got together, shared that information, and then told others what we found.
Okay. All right, good. And my very last question, I feel like we've touched on this from many different angles, but if you had to sum up what the pandemic has taught you as a leader, or how it has changed you as a leader, what would you say?
I think, it's a good question. I hadn't thought about it. We hadn't prepared for that. I would say probably the thing would be, you're more personal. Like, in fact, we just got we do a Monday morning, kind of touch base with myself and my direct reports. And we talked for 5 minutes about stuff today. Yeah. But for 25 minutes, we just talked about what went on the weekend and kind of what's happened in your life and where are you and kind of things. So we're spending more time just talking to people, relating to people. Yeah. It's the old adage, and Tom Mendoza was a big a mentor of mine and used to quote a lot. People don't care what you know until they know that you care, and that's a big part of effective leadership. Okay.
Well, good. Well, I think for a lightning round, unexpected question, I think you did just great on that. Thanks so much, Ralph. Okay, it was great having you here today. Really appreciate it. I feel like we've talked so many times over the years, and every time we talk, I learn a whole bunch of new stuff. So thanks for joining me here today.
Well, thanks for having me. A true pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Yes. If you joined us a little bit late today, do not despair. You can watch the full episode later today here on LinkedIn and also on CIO.com or on IDG's YouTube channel, which is called Tech Talk. CIO Leadership Live is also available as an audio podcast wherever you find your podcasts. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation today with CIO Ralph Lora of Lumentum as much as I did, and that you'll come back again in 2 weeks at noon Eastern on Monday, April 4th, when I'll be joined by Ken Spangler, who is the CIO of the Global OpCo Technologies at FedEx. We really appreciate you being here with us today. And do remember to take a moment to subscribe to that IDG Tech Talk YouTube channel, because you can actually see that we figured out this is number 84 of the CIO Leadership Lives we've been doing since the end of 2018. So feel free to binge your way through it if you've run out of great things to watch on Netflix. Stay well, and we'll see you here next time. Take care.